Welcome to Technology and Security. TS is a podcast exploring the intersections of emerging technologies and national security. I'm your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. My guest today is Connor Leahy. Thanks for joining me, Connor.
Thanks for having me.
Connor Leahy is the co-founder and CEO of Conjecture. He's also one of the most prominent voices warning of AI existential threats and has a long history in machine learning, which he's going to share a little bit about with us today. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continued connection to sea, land and community. So Connor, you co-founded Conjecture in 2022. Can you start off by telling me a little bit about the company?
Yeah, so Conjecture kind of is the latest in my longer career goals of addressing the problems of AI control. So kind of when I first got into machine learning, I was a teenager, and my thinking was, how can I solve the most problems? And I thought, well, if I figure out intelligence, well, then I can automate science, and I can solve all the problems. So I'll just go do that. How hard can it be? But what I realized pretty quickly was that the hard part of AI and of AGI is not just how to build it, it's how to control it, how to make it actually beneficial for society rather than just powerful. At Conjecture, we work specifically on kind of we're trying to build a commercial angle on this question. It's like, how do you build useful systems that, are useful to people, that provide value, that are like good, but do not have these kind of like existential risks that we're concerned about. But I also want a positive vision of the future of like, how can we harness technology in a beneficial way, in a pro-social way. So Conjecture specifically focuses on the narrow technical aspect of control, this question of just like, how do you build useful AI systems that do what you want and nothing else? Then next to Conjecture, I also spend quite a lot of time as a policy advocate because fundamentally what I deeply believe is that the problem of how to build a good future with technology is not a purely technical question. It is also a social and a political question.
What are the existential threats you see? But I want you to balance that out by saying, what is the good future that you're imagining?
So fundamentally, if you build things that are smarter than humans, that are more capable at business, politics, science, warfare, everything, and you don't control them, what do you think happens? Humanity gets outcompeted, and then the future belongs to something that is not human. This is the default outcome of where the market and things are currently being pushed. Is that it's not just existential risk is like some kind of like overdetermined thing that must happen. This is like completely wrong. I don't believe this. It's a decision that people are making today. The problem today is that people are deciding to give up the future of humanity to machines, and they're doing this on purpose. It's very clear is that people are racing. They're trying to get to more and more intelligent or more autonomous systems as quickly as possible, to spend as little on safety as possible, to understand the system as little as possible. There's a race ongoing here. There's a strong profit motive here, and also a kind of like libertarian ideology of like, things should be free or whatever. The fundamental thing is that like our society has certain mechanisms to deal with new threats as they emerge, but they are very slow and they're very inefficient. Our politicians, many of them, are trying their best and are working very hard. They don't understand the technology. The technology moves on a cadence of months, even weeks. Government works on a cadence of years or decades. And fundamentally, things are just moving too fast. The problem is that technology is an exponential. It's going faster and faster. It's not just going fast. It's accelerating. And the time between breakthroughs is shrinking. While in government, the time between meaningful legislation and meaningful decision-making on like a social level is increasing. It's getting slower. It's getting harder to make big decisions. It's getting harder for citizens to become informed, understand what's going on, and make informed decisions and have those decisions be effected within the world. And this mismatch is the core of the problem. So by default, there will just be no oversight. Whoever is the least careful is going to be first. Whoever has the least moral and ethical constraints is going to leapfrog everyone else, which we're seeing, with companies like Meta, Facebook, basically, becoming more and more aggressive, cutting more and more, and like even making fun of safety concerns. And so these people are going to be the ones who push technology as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. And the consequences, I think, are predictable.
I'm going to come back to the good future part in a second, but how can you be so sure that AGI is a real possibility or that we are heading towards this catastrophic risk if we don't do anything?
I mean, a couple 100,000 years ago, there were chimps and there were our ancestors. And from the perspective of anyone who would like look at this, our ancestors looked just kind of like a slightly different chimp, right? It was just like, they stand up a bit, they're a bit hairless, and they have like a little bit of a bigger brain. So if you at that time ask the question, well, what do you think this new chimp I made, what's it going to do? You'd say like, I don't know, maybe it'll throw rocks a bit harder or something. But that's not what happened. Turns out if you take a chimp brain and you scale it up about 3 times, you get nuclear weapons and they go to the moon. You don't just get slightly harder rock throwing. And within like a very short time frame in terms of evolutionary timescales. It wasn't like it took us millions of years of evolution to get to nuclear weapons. So fundamentally, we have to first acknowledge that intelligence is possible, and then it can go very quickly, compared, depending on the time frame. So if the equivalent would happen with computers, systems that are running at thousands or millions of times of our speed already, that can remember billions of facts, that can be perfectly copied hundreds and thousands of times, that can communicate with each other at light speed, and so on. If you transported this kind of like general intelligence thing to a thing like that, you would immediately have something that was thousands or billions of times smarter. And none of our science rules this out. Like, as far as we can tell, this is algorithmic progress. This is just like, this is a process that can be done. I'm not talking about like consciousness or whatever, because like everyone disagrees on what that means. What I care about is competence. And if we look just empirically, you can now talk to your computer. This was completely unthinkable just a couple of years ago. And the technologies are continuing to improve. Like, when they first came out, we were shocked that it could spell sentences correctly. Now we have them explain, quantum physics to us in Shakespeare and English, and we laugh because they made a math error halfway through. This is a boiling frog effect, where the technology is progressing. Turns out the algorithms that we're using to build these systems are just incredibly general purpose. Could there be some big barrier that we currently don't know of? Totally possible. It is totally possible that next year something happens and for some reason AI just stops dead in its track. It's possible, but we should take seriously the null hypothesis of what happens if it just keeps going at this pace. That should be our default assumption, because so far that's been how things have gone.
Can you describe a little bit to me about the AI market? Can you describe what you see in the market and how that's changing?
The AI market, the AI world is very weird. A lot of things happening in AI right now are not actually driven by market forces. This is actually quite confusing from the outside. It's a very, very, very strange world where a lot of the things that are happening right now are driven far more by ideology than they are by like hard-nosed business logic. We're seeing $1 billion flowing around, your OpenAIs, your Anthropics, or whatever. Most of those companies do not make money. They're actually hemorrhaging billions of dollars per year. They're extremely unprofitable. They're spending ungodly amounts of money on these big supercomputers that they need to do their AI work and whatever, with no clear path to profitability, etc. And this is very confusing to people. So from a Wall Street perspective, a lot of the AI stuff so far has not paid off. It's not very profitable. It's extremely expensive and so on. But there's kind of 2 reasons that these things are still being pushed. To be clear, there are some smaller AI things that are profitable, but in terms of these like very powerful and like frontier kind of stuff, there's kind of like 2 main reasons that this is being pushed. The one is the concept of like venture capital, where in venture capital, if you don't have profitability, this is fine. You're supposed to lose money. What's important is how many users you have. What's important is how much revenue you have. How quickly are you growing? Because the venture playbook generally is you burn tons and tons and tons and tons of cash to get to an extremely dominant market position. And then once you're extremely dominant in the market, you leverage your monopoly position in order to squeeze users to become ultra profitable. Like, this is, like the Google, Facebook, Uber, playbook. So Part of what's going on here is that we see this like super venture capital driven market. There's another second component of this, which I think is worth talking about briefly, which is this ideological component. A lot of the people who live in Silicon Valley, who work at these companies, who build these things, not everyone, but like many of these people, including many of the CEOs, for them, this is a religious thing. It's not just a technical or a business thing. For a lot of these people, they're building AI and AGI because they want to live forever, because they think AGI will be like God. It will solve all humanity's problems. It will create world peace. It will end world hunger. It will cure all diseases. It will cure cancer, and like everyone will live happily ever after. This is a thing that a lot of these people truly believe. We can argue about whether this is like makes sense or not, but like it's important to understand that a lot of these people really do believe this. They want to upload their brains to computers. They're transhumanists, and a lot of them have got a lot of power and a lot of money to try to fulfill this vision, because people now feel that it's maybe is within striking distance.
Can you outline what you see as the biggest threats and maybe opportunities of AI for security?
Yeah, so the way I think of AI very much as a general purpose technology is kind of like it is the ability to mass produce cognition. In the past, if you wanted cognition, if you wanted intellectual labor to happen, you were kind of limited to a certain degree. There's a kind of fundamental difference between like capital and labor, where like labor was a very specific kind of capital to a certain degree, where it's like you need people and they have rights and they need food and they need breaks and stuff like this. And this is like different capital where like machines where you just like you buy them and you just like use them. And as AI goes towards AGI, labor becomes capital, in that you can convert capital into intellectual and also to a degree physical once robotics has figured out labor. And so you get this great liquidity between where you can just buy more cognitive labor for arbitrary things. And the question is, what does it change if the price of labor goes to zero or like towards zero, if it becomes a commodity? And this changes many, many things. It makes many kinds of attacks and many kinds of systems or defenses unviable. Like in the past, it was fine to have a lock, in front of your physical door because, and it's like if it's an okay lock, because like how many thieves are going to try to pick your lock? Not that many, So it doesn't have to be resistant to the best lock picker in the world. But if you have a server online, that's very different, because the best, hacker can't just scan all computers. They could just send millions of hacking attempts. A lot of the systems have this shape where like it's hard, it takes time, you need to hire people. Imagine if you can now have 24/7 workers at this level of skill, and you can have thousands or millions of them running digitally, designing attacks, exploiting infrastructure, producing malware, misinformation, etc. This completely breaks the economics of attack versus defense. There's a big question. It's like how is the offense defense balance? Is that offense is always cheaper than defense? Defense is hard. You're trying to maintain a complex system. Well, you have to succeed as blue team, to succeed as defense. You have to ward off every single attack. As the attacker, you just have to get lucky ones. So it becomes much easier to cause damage than it is to defend against it. It's much easier to release a virus somewhere than it is to deploy a mass vaccine. As we build towards more and more intelligent and agentic systems, the system themselves become actors. Once you build a sufficiently powerful software that can make its own decisions, that can reason, that can learn from its environment, and that you don't control, so you don't understand, you are creating insider threat. You are creating systems that can optimize and take actions and do things that you might not be able to understand simply from the complexity. It's already the case, that like if you're managing a very complicated cyber-physical security system, it's very hard to understand what's going on in many cases. A very important thing to understand about AI is that it's not really software, not really the traditional sense. Traditional software is written by humans. Humans sit down, they type code, and they tell the computer step by step what to do. This is not how AI works. Very important to understand. Neural networks, AI is more like grown than it is written. You have these huge piles of data, and you use these big supercomputers to grow a program to solve your problem. But we don't actually know how these programs work internally and what they do. And we see all kinds of extremely strange and anomalous behavior from these systems already. We're going to have more and more strange systems that have strange, unexplainable behaviors in weird edge cases, or that can coordinate or work together in various ways, potentially without a human in the loop. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there we're getting really close. So this is going to exacerbate the problem, pretty clear and understandable. I think this catastrophe risk in terms of systemic risk that is being created by deploying systems that themselves can become insider risk, that can become agentic, or that are being made to be agentic, and potentially can also lead to a arms race where, your adversary might deploy some kind of agentic AI system that they don't really understand, but it's really competent. And every time they try to make it understandable, that slows it down. So you want to take off more and more of the guardrails, because that makes it faster and faster, stronger and stronger if you don't have humans in the loop. We're already starting to see this, with drone warfare systems taking humans out of the kill loop. So if your enemy is taking the human out of the kill loop decision, they have an advantage because their system can react faster than the human can. So there's this deadly spiral towards taking human supervision out of the system and empowering these automated decision-making systems to make these decisions. And so I think this is the kind of systemic ways where you get towards catastrophe.
You've mentioned control quite a few times. Do you think control is possible?
I think control is possible in theory. I don't think there's any law of physics that forbids us from building systems that do what we want. I think it's just very hard. Humanity is just not very good at building complex software. And it's not just humanity's fault. It's just software is complicated. Building a complex, especially cyber-physical kind of control system is just very, very hard. And it's not something that we've been doing for a very long time. We've only had software engineering as a discipline for 70 years. It's still a relatively young science and a relatively young engineering. We're still learning so much, and we are getting better. We have learned many things about how to produce formally verified software, about how to produce, memory-safe software and efficient software, better programming languages, better compilers, and so on. So when people ask well, why do you think AI will not be safe? And I'm wow, you think humanity, being faced with the biggest software engineering ever, using techniques we don't understand that are non-auditable, that are being done by all these actors in a racing environment that don't care about safety, are an adversarial race with each other, and that will somehow produce the first piece of bug-free software in history. It's just not how things work.
It's a utopian dream.
It's utopian. It is ridiculous. This is just not how real things work. It's it's nice to imagine. Sometimes people are well, but we could do it. And I'm yes, we could, but we won't. The same way we could produce formally verified, operating systems or consumer software that is mathematically proven to be unhackable. This is a thing the military has done, especially the US military has done mathematical verification of the safety of their helicopter control software and stuff like this, or airline control software and stuff like this. And it does work. It's just unbelievably expensive. It takes a decade and costs hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to do for any kind of even moderately complex piece of software. It's doable. It's just extremely hard. And the same thing applies here as well. I think there's no physical reason we couldn't. I just don't think that's what happens by default. And this is a political problem. It's an economic problem. It's not just a technical problem. The thing that makes helicopter control software powerful is huge, sprawling institutions of, scientific institutions, academia, bureaucracies, building really grindingly slow, tricky, theoretical, and bureaucratic processes over decades. This is how things work in the real world. And this is just slow and expensive and slow and stupid and just is not what's going to happen by default. But it is possible. By default, if you build computer systems, they will be sociopathic by default. It's just they lack empathy. They lack a lot of human basic emotions and social pressures. And by default, machines lack that as well. While ChatGPT might seem really nice and friendly and emotional, it's important to understand there are no emotions there. It is a simulation.
I'm going to pivot and go to a segment. What are some of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities in AI that you wish were better understood?
I think the main one is just the interdependence between technology. I mean, this goes beyond just AI, but like technology and politics and technology and like civics. I think from the humanist perspective, there is more appreciation of this interdependency, but the interdependency from the side of the technology, I feel, is underappreciated often. They don't really think as much about if I succeed, what happens. This is the thing that I see a lot when I talk to AI people, is that they talk super excitedly about how they're going to make their AI system remember things better or like be more agentic. And then when I ask them like, okay, but like, what if you succeed? What if it works? What if you build human level intelligence? Then what? And they just look at you completely blank stare. They just never thought about that. But all these things are interdependent. Of course it is. A good future is a political problem. It's a civics problem as much as it's a technical problem. I think like this interdependency also between like what people believe is possible versus what is possible is very, very important. Kind of a more subtle thing, but like the ideology that people think we can live forever, think that AGI will get us there, is a very strong driver of these things.
On AI safety, what were your thoughts on the Californian governor's veto of SB 1047?
The first word that comes to mind is predictable. I do think that this was extremely predictable from just kind of like following where the money was going. In this case, I think this was pretty blatant.
Do you think shutdown protocols for critical harm are really important?
I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're even having this debate, right? The bill is basically saying if you got catastrophic damage, if you had caused more than $500 million of damage, you could be liable, right? Like that's what it said, right? And I'm like, that's what we're arguing about? Really? So what these companies are saying is they want to have their cake and eat it too. Both they say our system could never cause so much damage, but also don't regulate it. Like don't make us liable if it does happen. So like, which one is it? Right? Either the technology cannot cause this much harm, and then you shouldn't care about regulating it, or it can, and then we should have a really strong talk about regulating it. So I think any powerful technology that can like cause $500 million plus damage, and I think it can cause way more than that, or like kill people, should be regulated. You know, whether it's through emergency shutdown protocols, liability, many things like this. Like, this is just obviously the case. Software has like wriggled its way around normal amounts of regulation. If we just regulated software and like AI the same way we do like airplanes or nuclear power, I think we would mostly be fine. Fundamentally, any civilization, any society that truly grapples with technology has to grapple with the fact that software is an integral component of a functioning society. In a sense, like software is often more important than the physical side of things. You know, software controls your and my lives in extremely important ways. And so the idea that something that's such an integral and huge component of society should not be, regulated and integrated well into society and just like allowed to basically tumorously grow however it wants into whatever dangerous aspects it wants is just utterly fallacious. Now, I'm not saying that SB 1047, the California bill, is necessarily the perfect way to do it. Is shutdown protocols the perfect way to do that? We can argue about that, but it's something. It's such a minimum even attempt to it that the thing I find most interesting about SB 1047 is how much it like baited out just how bad faith these lobbyists and these people really are, is that they really showed their true colors.
We've spoken about this before, but can you just briefly outline whether you think an AI Safety Institute model would work for Australia?
Yeah, I absolutely think it would. I have questions about the AI Safety Institute model. Is it the best possible model in all possible worlds? Probably not. Is it really a lot better than nothing? Yes, absolutely. Often it's having an institution that like, if you have a problem, you do want some institution whose job it is to think about that problem. This is like generally a good thing. And now there is a burgeoning international scene of these various AI safety institutes that are coordinating on international scale. They talk to each other, they know each other, and so on. I think this is very good. This is an international problem. It is also a national problem. It's a very important national security issue. But it's also an international security issue. And one of the most important things to start addressing international security issues is you have to open dialogue. So one of the great things that AI safety institutes give us is they give you this mechanism. They produce this like natural network of people plugged into the government, plugged into the technicals that can communicate and coordinate with each other. It's something from which other things can burgeon and grow. So I have some critiques of some of the AI safety institutes. Some of the research I think is maybe not the best, or like could be done different. Sure, whatever. Literally, who cares? The important thing is that there needs to be open lines. There needs to be people thinking about these kinds of things. There needs to be people whose job this is. Looking forward in the future, actually engage with these things and also like build the government capacity to think about these issues, to make technical decisions. It's not to say that there aren't other parts of the government that should also be thinking about, all these kinds of things. But so far, at least as joining an international community, thinking and addressing things, I think Australia would be a wonderful country to have joined. I think Australia specifically has a lot of unique things going for it. Australia has a long history in addressing catastrophic risks, from climate change to nuclear to biorisk, pandemic preparedness. Australia has this like really great culture, which I quite admire, of like diplomacy, of like thinking about diplomacy, both to the west, but also to the east, towards China and so on, of like thinking about how to manage, these kinds of relationships, how to address catastrophic risks. Australia also has, quite frankly, between you and me, quite functioning government compared to some other Anglophone countries. Like rate preference voting and mandatory voting. That's amazing. They're like, wow, you did it. Like everyone keeps talking about it, but Australia actually has it. That's amazing. I've been very, very impressed with like Australian civil servants and politicians I have talked to in the small domain that I'm aware of. I'm quite impressed by people caring and like being willing to engage with this issue. And another thing is just Australia does not have the same kind of like lobbying that exists, for example, in California, where just these tech lobbies have just stranglehold power over politicians. And so I was talking to the e-safety commissioner in Australia, Julie Inman-Grant, and I was just very impressed. Australia has laws about, misinformation, hate speech, and so on that it has tried to enforce and like actually went to bat for, actually went to fight, and got absolute hell from Elon Musk threatening on X and like yelling at companies saying we're going to pull out of Australia, we're going to ruin your whole economy. Let's call that what it is: threats, blackmail. Australia has done a really good job of just like actually standing up to this and also thinking like, wait, hold on, this isn't okay. Like we can't have these like foreign companies that are under different jurisdiction telling us what laws we can enforce in our jurisdiction. This is a crazy threat to national sovereignty. And what I found, and like this applies to many countries, including the US, by the way. I think the US also is being limited in what they can enforce within their own national jurisdiction by these companies. But Australia, I feel like, has this feeling that like this is wrong and we need to do something about this, and has the guts to actually do something about this. So, and also just like, of course, just highly educated populace, extremely competent, rich country, extremely well respected, great ally of the US, Five Eyes members. It's just, there's a lot of things going for Australia that I would just really, really love to see more of the Australian perspective and the Australian, voice in these conversations.
Thank you, Connor. We've just kind of segued perfectly because I did want to ask you about power and technology. What are your reflections on that? And particularly about the handful of companies and frontier models being centralized.
And a long time ago, it feels like we thought the internet would make us free, that it would, think back to like the Arab Spring and stuff like this. We thought that, wow, if information is just free, we just don't regulate, then there will be this plurality and democracy would flourish and like people would be free and take their information everywhere. And this is not what happened. This monopolization, this like concentration of power is not new to AI, but we're seeing it happen again. We're seeing it happen again where perhaps to an even more extreme degree, where this monopoly on power, on data, and also on computing power is deciding who gets these decisions. If the companies can have smarter AI systems and stronger AI systems, and everyone is dependent on using their hardware to build the AIs, then no one is free. It's like this just concentrates the power more. They get even more decisions-making power, even more control.
Does the current state of play blunt our ability to wage war independently as we're so reliant on companies?
Absolutely. Yeah, the US military apparatus cannot function without private market. Now, this might be fine, right? Part of the reason why the American, military is so powerful is because it can leverage the private markets to, get the best talent and the best competition and so on. So, there are reasons why this is the case, but there are very, very concerning facts here. Especially, is Lockheed Martin going to pull out? Don't think so. Will Google or Microsoft, kind of a bit scarier, a bit uncertain. It's even worse for other ones where other countries are extremely dependent upon software supplied by mostly American and Western developers and suppliers. And as I said, software is as deeply integrated and into society and as important as hardware is. A thing is just Microsoft can just pull back their software, including deployed software, to a much larger degree than you could pull back, say, deployed hardware. But to a certain degree, you can take Microsoft Windows back to a certain degree. Not perfectly, but to a certain degree, or at least you can insert a backdoor. If I was Russia, I would not be running Microsoft Windows on anything at stake here that I think the US has the least concern about, but should also have concern about. Other countries should have massive concerns about. Again, sovereignty issue. Governments cannot function to varying degrees without software, without Microsoft Office. And so this is a big interdependency. They operate to a large degree like nation states in many capacities and have geopolitical power comparable or even in excess of many nation states.
We've recently seen US concern around Chinese EVs with the proposed ban, as well as national security interference and data collection risks. Do you see these concerns shifting into other technology areas and becoming a greater part of this kind of software challenge?
The US is very complicated, obviously, but there is obviously a Cold War. At least it's more of an economic war and more an informational warfare at this moment between especially China and the US, but also even more directly Russia and the West. In the modern world, if you wanted to do warfare and prepare for war, a massive or even the main thing you want to do is prepare cyber capabilities. You want to deploy deep-seated, logic bombs. You would want modified hardware, cyber physical systems based on your systems that you have backdoors into and stuff like this. And the thing with cyber is this correlated loss, where you can just turn off every single thing all at once. This is not the case with physical systems generally. If you're in a kinetic warfare, you might be able to destroy a certain building. But what if you can turn off every building or every building of a certain make, no matter of the physical distance? This is a very different risk profile. So talking about how complex cyber and cyber physical systems are, it's impossible to secure these things. They're too complicated. It's just an EV is so complicated. There are so many parts. There is so much software, there are so many computer chips, and there's so many ways you could backdoor these. There is simply no way that anyone could convince me 100% probability that an EV I was sold is definitely secure and hack-proof, including from the US, to be clear.
Going to a segment on alliances, how does AI create opportunities for alliances and collaboration?
I think it's very important to never forget that this is a humanity issue. It's not just a Australia issue or US or China issue. It is a thing that affects all of us. Whenever people talk of international treaties, everyone kind of chuckles politely, But I think this undersells how much it is possible to work together at larger scales and how important this is and how it can align people's interests. Long before human cloning was possible, scientists figured out it should be possible. And they came together, multiple conferences, and they found, wow, this could be extremely disruptive to society. Seems like a big risk. We should at least have a moratorium and like not do this until we figured out how we want to handle this. And like people took this very, very seriously. People were very concerned about this. And so they came together and they built an international treaty. We don't clone humans. This is a massive success. This is a huge story of how humanity came together, decided this is not what we want for the future of our species, and then we actually didn't do it. This is incredible. And I think AI is an opportunity for us, across the East and the West, kind of under duress, but also as an opportunity to come together and be like, how do we want to have our rules of engagement? Like, how do we want to see the 21st century play out? And what do we not want to play out? We did it also with, banning weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, nuclear.
I totally agree. And I think it's really important to kind of take that moment and say, this is also about inspiring people, right? It's about inspiring our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, our countries, that imagining a strategic future that we actually want to live in is really important, and working towards that is something that we need to do together. Let's go to another segment. It's called Disconnect. How do you wind down and unplug?
I basically do 3 things in my life. I work, I eat good food, and I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. That's like my big hobby, or like tabletop role-playing games. I design my own and like write my own rule systems and like stuff like that.
We'll go to another segment. It's emerging tech for emerging leaders. What do you see as some of the biggest shifts for leadership from the introduction of new technologies?
I think leadership is very important right now. One of the main things I found in general is just as technology progresses and as more technology emerges, it accelerates. Things move faster. And as things move faster, as things become more uncertain, leadership becomes more important, not less. It becomes more important for leaders to be able to take decisive actions, to take responsibility, to take ownership of like what decisions get made. So as technology progresses faster, I think it's more important leaders step up, take responsibility for understanding what's going on. If you don't understand it, find out who to talk to. Do something. Figure it out, make a decision, and actually push for it. Actually talk to other leaders, talk to other people. Otherwise, generic answer, I'm afraid.
Coming up is a segment called Eyes and Ears. What have you been reading, listening to, or watching lately that might be of interest to the technology and security audience?
So this is probably not a new recommendation, but I just finished actually Yuval Harari's new book, Nexus. I thought it was really good. It falls apart a little bit in the latter half of the book, but the first half of the book is some of the best stuff I've read in a very long time. It's about information and like what is information and like how does it shape history and human society. I highly recommend it. Don't quite agree with all his suggestions in the second half of the book. I think they're a bit simplified, but overall, highly recommend it.
And the final segment is Need to Know. Is there anything I didn't ask that would have been great to cover?
That's a great question. I mean, we could have gone a lot harder into like what should be done in terms of like regulation, how much time we have, the technical things, and so on. Luckily, probably by the time this is out, a document that me and my colleagues and my friends have been working on, which goes into great detail of all of these things from our perspective. I think this would be of great interest for people here to read. If it's out, hopefully I'll have a link to share.
I have one final question for you. What is the great future that you imagine with tech?
So the boring answer is, of course, is that I don't really know, because I don't really know how the future works. At the very minimum, we can create a better humanist future. But the true meta answer to this question is that I don't know, and I don't think I should get to decide. The true future I really want, the thing I want more than anything else in the world, is for humanity to get a choice. I think it's like consent and choosing is just like very core to like how we think about ethics. Is that I want people to be allowed to choose what they want, and I want people to be allowed to make choices that I disagree with. The ultimate liberal dream of just like, of people having their own pursuit of happiness. And I think it's doable. It's just very hard.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you as well.
Thanks for listening to Technology and Security. I've been your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. If there was a moment you enjoyed today or a question you have about the show, feel free to tweet me at MIAH_HE or send an email to the address in the show notes. You could find out more about the work we do on our website, also linked in the show notes. If you like this episode, please rate, review, and share it with your friends.